Here now is Chief Meteorologist Tom Sorrells with Talk to Tom. Sponsored by Greenway Dodge.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Talk to Tom. I'm Tom Sorrells, Chief Meteorologist here at WKMG News 6. Thank you for being here for this show. This is a pet project of mine that I just absolutely love doing, and I'm so glad that you're part of it. Every week, we start out by answering questions that you, the viewers, have submitted. And then we get into a really cool guest. You can get in on the conversation by going to clickorlando.com/talk to Tom. Submit your questions. I'd love to hear what you want to know about in Central Florida or around the world, for that matter. All right, let's start out with our first question from Tanya. Tanya Brode, it looks like. Can two hurricanes collide? And if so, what would happen? Okay, Tanya, here's the deal. That has happened before. Hurricanes do run in headlong to each other, but they're not like solid objects. It's not like two trains colliding or two cars colliding or even two balls hitting each other. They're fluid and they're dynamic and they're rolling around. In the Pacific Ocean, it happens more often than you might think. I want to say there's a stat on that. I think it's every 1 to 2 years or 1 to 3 years, we end up with what we call the Fujiwara effect. And what happens is, as they approach each other, they don't just slam into each other. They kind of go around each other and start circling each other like two guys who are going to get in a fight start circling, or two animals that are going to get in a fight and they start circling. Because of the way they spin, they end up circling each other when they're about anywhere from 500 to 800 miles apart. The upper airflow will start to influence each other and they spin around. That's the way it happens in the water. It has happened in the Atlantic, but our basin is much smaller than the Pacific basin. So it happens more in the Pacific Ocean. Normally, if they get within 300 miles of each other, one of them tears the other apart. And no, they don't strengthen and blow up and get bigger because it's sucked in the other one. Basically, they destabilize one another, or one of them rips the other one apart and just absorbs the moisture. So it's not like it becomes a big super typhoon or a big super hurricane. It just takes in the moisture from the other one, and eventually, more likely than not, they dissipate. More likely than not, because they get ripped apart. A hurricane has to be stacked from bottom to top. If it's tilted, if it's getting sheared, if it's getting interaction with another system, it kind of knocks it off its kilter and messes it up. All right, our friend Andrew wants to know, do you think hurricane season will be extended in the future? You know, I don't know. And I'm not the one who gets to make that call. That will be a call made by the folks at NOAA or the World Meteorological Organization. But I don't think they're going to give in to that. There was a stat that we had last year that something like 6 out of the last 7 years, or 7 years in a row, we had started hurricane season in May, or at least in May, if not fired off a storm in April. It used to be that they would always tell us we had the National Hurricane Conference every year in April, because that's the only month of the year when we never had a tropical system. That's just not so anymore, because a few years ago we popped off an early depression, which became a tropical storm in April. It's weird that a couple of our hurricane seasons have extended past November. We've had storms every month of the year, but the actual season per se, I think, is still going to be June 1st to the end of November. And that's when most of the activity happens. And frankly, most of the activity happens after about the middle of August. Like about August 15th or so is when things really ramp up. We hit an apex on September 10th, and then we begin to drop on off into the autumn. And as the Jamaican poem always said, come October, nearly over. So I don't think that's going to change, even though we may end up having more late season storms and more early season storms. I still think we're going to stick to that 6 months of the year, not go, well, it's hurricane season all year. Yeah. All right, next question comes to us from our friend Sharon. Sharon wants to know, are all clouds capable of creating lightning? Well, Sharon, it depends on what you mean by that. All clouds don't produce lightning for the most part. Stratus clouds don't. Fog doesn't, for the most part, create lightning. To create lightning, you have to have excitability or lift going through the clouds in the atmosphere. You can get fair weather cloud cover, patchy fair weather clouds, and you shoot a rocket through it and it excites the molecules in there enough, heats them, they expand enough that boom, you have what we call trigger lightning. So in essence, in that regard, yes, it's dangerous to shoot a rocket through any cloud cover because it could create lightning. But on its own, normally it does not create lightning. It could. Like fog is not going to create lightning. And what fog is basically is that's a stratus cloud in contact with the ground. When you're out in fog, you're kind of in a cloud. You are. And so then it lifts and becomes, a thick layer of high and then eventually dissipates. But all clouds can create lightning if triggered or if lifted or something excites the molecules. That's true. And finally, our man Joe. I know Joe. Flagler County Joe. Knights of the Inferno Joe. Joe says, growing up, I would always hear people say, if you want to know what the weather is going to be on a certain day, check the Farmer's Almanac. How accurate do you think that was? And is it still used today? Farmer's Almanacs, like most publications, Joe, have gone the way of the horse and buggy. You just don't see them like you used to. It used to be every year the Farmer's Almanac would have a huge display at the markets, in the bookstores, and people would buy them and give them as gifts. And it was kind of interesting for several reasons, not only for the weather forecasting ability, but also because of the trivia that was inside. There were all kinds of things. You can imagine living way out in the sticks or way out in the country somewhere, and someone comes in with a Farmer's Almanac, and it's like a trivia book, all kinds of weird questions, tips on how to grow tomatoes or whatever. And I have a few of them at my house from the old days. Like, I don't know, my wife, she wants to throw those out. And I can't let them go. But I think the Farmer's Almanac was fun for people, an interesting conversation starter, and was basically climatology that was handy. They based most of their forecast on climatological stuff, and hard to go wrong, hard to get it exact on a date. But if I told you that, second week of October, there's going to be a cold front approaching Central Florida, and October comes, you're going to look at the map and go, hey man, he didn't miss it by much. He said on October 18th, there was going to be a cold front approaching Florida. Look, there's a cold front all the way to Atlanta. He was close. Well, that's just climatology. Our rainy season runs from about May 27th until about October 18th, when a cold front finally comes through and shuts down the sea breezes, and the pattern changes, and we don't have enough moisture anymore. Dry air masses start to move in, and we kill the rain. So I really think that's what the Almanac did. I think it did more climatology than actual forecasting, and they based most of their forecast on generalizations. They also got the tides right, so they could do the tides, and they could do sunrise and sunset, and that was the good information for people before you could look it up on Google. Like, you couldn't just go to your computer and Google stuff. You had the Farmer's Almanac. They are still around. I have seen them, but they're not nearly as prevalent. Like, when's the last time you saw a Time magazine or a U.S. News and World Report? You know what I'm saying? Same thing with the Farmer's Almanac. You just don't see them much anymore. So there you go. Hopefully we answered all your questions. Anytime you have a question for us here at Talk to Tom, please submit it to us through click.orlando/Talk to Tom. I would love to know what you were thinking. Send them on in here. Okay, stick with us. Coming up, we'll take you inside this algae harvesting ship and explain how it's cleaning things up in Brevard County. All right, welcome back to Talk to Tom, everybody. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tom Sorrells here at the powerful WKMG News 6. I appreciate you staying with us. Green, yucky water is about to get the boot in Brevard County. Now, if you don't know anything about me from watching Talk to Tom, environment is my thing. I'm from the age of give a hoot, don't pollute, clean up the environment, try to save the planet. I'm all about that. And algae is a huge problem here in Central Florida, most especially in Brevard County now. But the leaders there have come up with a new tool to try and help clean things up. It's called an algae harvesting ship. It's been designed to address the overload of nutrients that have caused the harmful algae blooms in our waterways, and the goal is to send it around the Indian River Lagoon and target the hot spots and curb the growth. I'm being joined now by my friend Dan Levy, National Director and founder of AECOM Algae Practice. Did I get that right, Dan?
You got that right, Tom.
All right,
Pleasure
good.
to talk to you today.
Thank you for being here, my man. As I was saying, the environment's my thing. Obviously, I'm a meteorologist, and I care about the environment. I care about the atmosphere. I care about climate change and all the damage that we do to the planet. I have 3 kids. I'd like for them to grow up and have a better planet than I did. So let's talk about what you're doing. Let's talk about the algae first and foremost. And since I'm a meteorologist, first question out of the chute is, how does the weather impact the algae?
Well, it's a little bit of both. What we have seen in really the last decade plus, we've seen a surge of what is known as harmful algal blooms. Essentially, these are abundance of algae that turn toxic. They have cyanotoxins in them. And if we look around the country, and it's not just the US, it's around the globe, we've reached either a tipping point. We can attribute this to anthropogenic sources. We now have 7.2 billion people on the planet. We can also attribute it to climate change. We have warmer waters. And these are essentially allowing the algae to grow rapidly.
All right, talk to me about that. You're talking about it's bad for the water, obviously. When you see it, you don't want to get in it. But how bad is it for the marine life, both in the water and on top of the water?
It's actually devastating. Algae is good. We need algae. It provides a lot of oxygen for our planet. But when you get an accumulation, too much of it, it becomes a bad thing. And because of what we're facing today with the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, we're seeing a cyanotoxins be more dominant. So it's called blue-green algae. It's really a bacteria, but it's in the algae family. And we're seeing that to be more and more prevalent because nothing is eating them. They release a toxin. These toxins are very problematic. And while human beings are great filters, certain animals, livestock, dogs, etc., are more susceptible to certain cyanotoxins or algae toxins. One in particular is known as microcystin. It has been linked to numerous deaths of dogs. And recently, the University of Florida, during COVID, which didn't get a lot of coverage, showed that microcystin actually can be airborne and it can be aerosolized. So it's a serious issue. And we need to find ways to mitigate this. We need to find ways to start taking action. The do nothing approach is no longer valid. We're not there anymore. We cannot let this take its own course because that's going to lose assets. And Tom, you brought up an excellent point. What does this mean for the water?
Right.
If you look at the IRL in Brevard County, it is one of the pristine habitats for manatee. If we go back in time, and as you know, we had an abundance of seagrass that fed and provide habitat for these valuable creatures. But when algae accumulates, it starts blocking the sunlight because algae photosynthesizes. They want to get up to that surface. They want to take the sunlight. But when you get an accumulation of them, they block the sunlight. And all of a sudden, they starve out the light to the seagrasses. And then that becomes problematic. And you can see a chain reaction. We start losing habitat for the manatee. We've seen over the years huge deaths of manatee for lack of food. And we have to mitigate this. And this is just one of many causes that the abundance of harmful algal blooms are having an effect on our world, on our planet, and on our environment.
Well, let's talk about the ship because that's what we're really here for.
Yep.
You got this new program, this new ship you guys have put together. Why did AECOM create the ship?
Well, I've been in Florida for 40 years now. And Tom, as you probably know, 2016 was a massive problem for us here on the East Coast. In Martin County, we had at that time Governor Scott declared a state of emergency. It was July 4th, 2016. We had the worst harmful algal bloom that I have seen. And it was devastating. And then 2 years later, we had another harmful algal bloom, and this was on really more impacting the West Coast. And being in Florida and spending my career in the environmental agencies, working with Lake Okeechobee, looking at all the nutrient problems, I didn't see anything on the market. We had a lot of chemicals, copper sulfate. We had peroxide as treatments, but these are spot sources. These are not a long-term solution. So I took it upon myself and with the support of AECOM, developed an algae program within the firm. We now have some of the leading experts in the world as part of our algae practice. And we started looking at ways and how we can physically take out the nutrients in a large-scale manner. So we developed the hydronucleation system. Essentially, we can extract microscopic algae from the water in a very rapid rate and take that algae out without lysing or rupturing the cell. And when we do that, we then have an algae biomass. We essentially have an accumulation of algae that you can now see. You can touch it. We get an enormous amount of this biomass out. But what's in that biomass is a lot of carbon, because algae are great at taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, they take up the phosphorus and the nitrogen in the water, the two real key nutrients that form algae. So if we can reduce the nutrients in the water, we can reduce the food source for the algae and essentially prevent, or at least reduce, the risk of harmful algal blooms.
Okay, obviously you can't give me your corporate secret, but is this like a giant filtration system? Like you put it through a filter, you put it through an electric current? What are you doing?
We're using air to essentially create an air pocket that allows us to raise and keep the algae at the surface long enough that we can then scrape it off the top and return back crystal clear water. So when you see an iced tea, a cup of iced tea, if you order it, you would say, well, it's light brown in color. Really can't see much in that. That's how some of the water looks that has an abundance of algae in it. It's hard to see through, but you can see through it. You might not see the particles. Our system would clarify that out, essentially turn that water crystal clear and take those particles, in this case, it would be algae, and then we'd be able to float it to the surface, scrape it off, and then consolidate that into now what would be considered a biomass. And we can do a lot of things with that. Today, we can turn that into crude oil by adding heat and pressure, very similar to what's done in nature. I'm a geologist by discipline, and this is one of the things that led me down this path.
Okay.
We can take the carbon, this microscopic pieces of carbon, and we can turn this into barrels of crude oil. So we've done a test in Altamont Springs last year. We were up in Cincinnati about 6 months ago, and we took water that had harmful algal blooms in it, essentially went through our harvesting process, went through a dewatering process, and then went through the conversion of using heat and pressure, and this is known as hydrothermal liquefaction, and transform that algae into crude oil in the same day. So there's a lot of good uses on this end product. That's not what we're intended for. We're intended today to keep our water safe. We want to keep our waters clean. We want to be able to take the nutrients out to reduce the threat of harmful algal blooms. But if we can bring a sustainability element to that, where we can then support the development of clean fuel, the development of a biofertilizer, then that's a better benefit. And that's what we're all about. We're creating a closed loop system that could be scaled and used around our country to help prevent and protect our citizens from the adverse effects of harmful algal blooms.
Okay, last question, Dan. I'll let you go. This has been fascinating. I can't wait to see this ship. When and where can our people get outside and see it?
We'll be up and down the IRL over the next several months, and you can take a look at it. And if anybody's interested, Tom, if you want to come out, I will give you a personal tour. That'd
be great. So you're going to be running up and down the Indian River Lagoon. Is there a name on the side of the ship when people see it? Does it say AECOM, or what does it say?
That's exactly what it says. The AECOM algae harvesting ship.
They can't miss it, in other words.
You can't miss it. It's over 110 feet long. So
that's going to be awesome.
You should be able to see it.
Okay, Dan, thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Dan Levy, National Director and Founder of AECOM Algae Practice. Thank you, Dan, for being on Talk to Tom. I love what you're doing. Thank you for watching here on Talk to Tom. We love you, love you, love you. Remember, you can always submit your questions anytime on clickrelated.com/talk2tom. And we are always streaming and available for you on News 6 Plus. I'll see you next time.